Right now, the United States and Iran are staring each other down at a critical crossroads. Seriously, one path could lead to diplomacy, maybe even a deal. The other, a potentially devastating war. In this explainer, we're going to break down this monumental choice facing the White House, looking at the arguments for both negotiation and for conflict, all based on the very latest analysis.
And wow, the stakes couldn't be clearer. This is a direct warning from Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. This isn't just some diplomatic talk. It's a very blunt threat that any U.S. military action won't just be a small, contained thing. No, it could set the entire Middle East on fire. And on the other side, you've got President Trump's response. It's this mix of, confidence and a bit of a challenge, pointing to the massive U.S. naval power that's been built up in the region. He's basically saying, hey, the door's open for a deal, but let's be real clear, the military option is sitting right there on the table.
Okay, so let's walk down that first path, diplomacy. High-level talks are supposedly on the horizon. But here's the big question that's just hanging in the air. Is this a real, genuine chance for a breakthrough, or are we just watching the same old movie where talks are used to buy more time?
So what does this diplomatic push actually look like? Well, a U.S. envoy is set to head to Istanbul for these big talks. But the U.S. is coming to the table with a really firm, non-negotiable goal: the complete and verifiable end to Iran's nuclear weapons program. It's pretty much an all-or-nothing kind of deal. But all of this, all of the talks, the envoys, the potential deals, it really boils down to one single critical question, and that's trust. Looking at the regime's recent actions and, frankly, their history, is Iran actually negotiating in good faith? And believe me, there are some pretty big reasons to be skeptical. We're seeing satellite images that apparently show Iran rebuilding nuclear facilities that were just recently bombed. At the same time, they've just signed a new strategic pact with Russia and China to get around sanctions, and they've flat out refused to ship their enriched uranium out of the country. For a lot of analysts, this doesn't look like negotiation at all. It looks like a classic play for time. But there's another way to look at this, a pretty compelling counter-argument. Some experts think Iran is weaker right now than it has ever been. They're facing a collapsing economy, a massive water crisis, and just huge unrest inside the country. So the regime might actually be negotiating out of sheer desperation, which would give the U.S. this incredible leverage to force a real deal. All right, now let's pivot and look at that other fork in the road, the case for military intervention. For some people watching this isn't just a policy choice. They're calling it a defining moment for the administration and really for the future of the entire Middle East. And the moral argument for a strike? Well, it really starts with this one absolutely shocking number. Credible reports are estimating that as many as 30,000 young Iranians have been killed by their own government in these recent crackdowns. For those who support intervention, that alone is justification for action. But the case for a strike goes way beyond Iran's borders. Proponents of this view say the regime is the single greatest source of instability in the region. They point to its funding of a whole network of terrorist proxies, its role in killing hundreds of American troops in Iraq with those deadly IEDs, and even targeting dissidents right here on U.S. soil. This paints a picture of a regime that's a direct, active threat to global security. And this quote right here from Rebecca Henricks at the Hudson Institute, it just perfectly captures the strategic argument. The idea is that the regime isn't just a threat, it's also at its weakest point ever. So that internal vulnerability, combined with all the external aggression, creates what she calls a major strategic opportunity. And this is where the choice gets really, really stark, especially as it's framed by people like General Jack Keane. He argues that any deal, even a so-called good one, ultimately just legitimizes and props up the regime, essentially betraying all those protesters who died fighting for change. In this view, military action is presented as a historic opportunity, a paradigm shift that could secure peace for decades. So it's absolutely crucial to understand that neither of these paths is a safe bet. If the U.S. chooses military action, the consequences could be huge and totally unpredictable, putting the entire region on a knife's edge. So let's just break down those risks. First, you've got the Ayatollah's own threat of a regional war. We can't ignore that. Second, think about this. Iran has the missile capability to target the roughly 40,000 U.S. troops stationed all across the Middle East. And third, any conflict could instantly disrupt the Strait of Hormuz. That's a critical choke point for global oil and trigger a massive economic shock around the world. And to really get why things are so tense right now, you have to look back.
This isn't something that just popped up overnight. This confrontation has been simmering for over 4 decades, starting with the 1979 revolution, continuing with Iran-supplied IEDs killing Americans in Iraq, and all the way to recent U.S. military operations against their nuclear sites. Today's standoff is really the culmination of a long and bloody history. So all of this brings us right back to where we started, the ultimate choice. We've looked at the arguments for diplomacy, we've looked at the case for a strike. Now let's just distill it all down to the historic crossroads that the administration is facing right now.
So here it is, the choice, laid out as clearly as possible. On one side, you have the diplomatic path. That means engaging a regime that critics call completely untrustworthy. You risk propping them up, but you could avoid a catastrophic war. On the other side is the military path, striking a regime that some have described as diabolical. You risk that exact war, but the potential prize is liberating a nation and totally reshaping the Middle East.
It's a decision with just unbelievable consequences, which leaves us all with one final, really tough question to think about. When you're facing a regime described in such stark terms, what's the greater risk? The consequences of taking direct action, or the consequences of just letting the status quo continue?